What's up, everybody? It's Mr. Landingwin. Today we're going to talk about markets and how we can visually depict a market in what is known as a circular flow diagram model. So our learning target for today is to be able to visually illustrate a circular flow model and to provide examples of personal application of the circular flow model. But let's start off today's class with a quick activator. Now, I want you to think of a place like Walmart. And when you walk into Walmart, there are a ton of different products. So I want you to think of 3 products and then list which department you would find those products in. So pause the video right now and go ahead and fill out that activator, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, great. Hope you had a chance to fill that out. Now, when you walk into Walmart, there are a ton of different products, and they are all organized by a department. So for instance, you might find movies in the electronics department, or shoes in the apparel department, maybe apples in the grocery department. The reality is that Walmart is organized such that you can find specific products in specific departments. And if you think about it, Walmart is really what we would refer to as a market. A market, simply put, is where you have someone bringing a product and another person going to that same location to buy the product. So a market is a location, but it can also extend to an economy. And if we look at that in terms of an economic philosophy, like the United States, ultimately what you would see represented is a notion of buying and selling, determining what goods are produced, how they're produced, and who gets the products. So a market is where individuals own the resources, where the factors of production are privately owned. And in a market-based system, the government is supposed to have a limited role. So ultimately, a market is where buyers and sellers come to meet and then have a transaction where both parties are going to be better off than when they started. Now, one characteristic of a market economy is what is known as voluntary exchange. Voluntary exchange is when you have one person buying, one person selling, but both parties are doing this willingly. For instance, when I go to buy gasoline for my car, I'm willingly giving up my money in exchange for the gasoline. Now, why would I do that? Well, I need my car to operate properly. And so for me, if I buy the gasoline, I know my car is going to drive as it should. Therefore, I'm willing to give up my money in exchange for this product. I am better off after the transaction. Now, how is the business better off? Well, the business receives my money. They can take that money then, and then they can use it for increased inventory, to hire workers, to expand, or to do whatever they please. But they are generating revenue through this transaction. Again, a voluntary exchange is where 2 parties meet to exchange goods and services for money, and both parties end up better off after the transaction. So an important thing to remember is that in any market, you have 2 major players. You have buyers and you have sellers. You always have a buyer, you always have a seller. One of the neat things about the circular flow diagram is that we can actually visually depict a market system. So before we do that, let's identify who's involved in this market-based system. In the circular flow model, you will see what are called households and firms. Households, simply put, are a group of people living together in a residence. And again, they act as both a buyer and a seller at different times in a market economy. A firm is also known as a business, really just an organization which is bringing products to the market. They too can act as a buyer and a seller in this circular flow model. Now let's talk about the 2 markets that these 2 entities exist in or that they transact in. The first one is known as the product market. Now the product market is kind of like it sounds. It's for products. And so when you go to the product market, you might go to eBay or Amazon online. Maybe you go to McDonald's or another type of retail industry. And when you go there, you as the household member are going there to buy a product to satisfy your wants or needs. The business, they're going to the product market to sell the product. So the role of the household in the product market is to be the buyer, and the role of the firm is to be the seller. So again, product market, where products are exchanged from the firm to the household in this voluntary transaction. The second market is known as the factor market. In the factor market, the factors of production are exchanged. So there's a role reversal that occurs between the household and the firm. In this case, the household becomes the seller, the firm becomes the buyer. Therefore, the firm is going to the factor market to buy resources. Now, what resources would they be buying? Well, any of the factors of production. But if you think about your own personal contribution to the factor market, most of us will contribute labor. So we are going to the product market to sell our labor, and the firm is coming there to buy our labor. They're going to pay us, we're going to go to work. Again, in the factor market, there's a role reversal where households become the seller and firms become the buyer. Now, this brings us to the circular flow model. The circular flow model shows us the flow of money and of goods and services, as well as inputs, in a illustrated fashion. So we see the households and the firms coming together to transact in both of these markets. And what we'll see is that there is always a voluntary exchange where one person is receiving one thing and the other entity is receiving the other thing. Okay, so now we're going to look at a circular flow model. We're going to identify the component parts of the model. Now, on your packet, what you have are empty blanks, which are numbered. Okay, so as we go through this, you're going to fill it in, and this will give you an opportunity to analyze how the circular flow model works. Okay, so let's start off with number one, box number one. And box number one represents the households. Okay, so the households are, again, the group of people that are living together, and they act as both a buyer and a seller. Number two are the firms. And so the firms are basically the businesses, okay? And again, they also act as a buyer and a seller. The two markets that these two groups communicate in are the product market and the factor market. So the product market is where the households go to buy stuff and the businesses go to sell stuff. The factor market is where the households go to sell their labor and the businesses go to hire. Okay, so let's look at the circular flow and how the flow of money is represented on this diagram. So if you look at the arrow from the households to the product market, arrow in box number 5, that is where households are bringing their money to buy stuff. And the businesses in box 6, they are there to sell the stuff. So we've got this transaction that's about to occur as the households bring the money and the businesses bring the stuff, and then they transact. Once the money is spent by the household, it becomes the business's money. And so the business income or revenue is how the business, the firm, continues to operate. They hire more workers, they invest in more inventory and capital, and that is, again, how a business operates. And likewise, once we spend the money, the stuff becomes our stuff. So the stuff flows from the business through the product market to us, the consumer, as a consumer good or service. Now let's take a look at the factor market. In the factor market, the household is going to the factor market to sell their labor or to get a job. So in box 10, the household is saying, look, I'm here to work. And so the business in box 9 is saying, well, I'm here to hire you. And ultimately what ends up happening is there's a transaction. So the business is buying, the household selling, and we have this voluntary exchange in the factor market. And again, the factor market is represented by the business hiring the worker and the worker becoming an input for production. So fundamentally, we have a household member selling a factor production. Now, what do they pay us, or how do they pay us to come to work? They pay us a wage, an income, or a salary. So the circular flow model, what you really see here is the flow of money in one direction and the flow of inputs and outputs in the other direction. And there's a voluntary exchange constantly occurring as these two parties involve and transact. Okay, so in your Google slide, you have an empty circular flow model. What I want you to do is I want you to fill this in based on your own personal application of information. In other words, you're going to take and connect your life and real world examples to the circular flow. Okay, so how do you fill this out? Well, let's walk through it together. You can type in as I speak, or you can pause it at any time and start filling it out. But this is what you would write in each one of these boxes. All right, so for household members, you're gonna write all of the people that are in your household. So for me, I would write myself, my wife, my son, and my daughter. For the firms, you're gonna have two firms. Firm number 1 is gonna be where you recently purchased something, and firm number 2 is going to be where you work. So for firm number 1, I'm going to put Summer Waves. That's where I recently purchased and spent my money. Okay? Firm number 2, I'm going to put Glenn Academy because that's where I work. Now, if you don't have a job, just select someone in your household that does have a job. Okay. Now, for consumer spending, what we're going to put is how much we spent on that transaction or on that purchase. So for me, I spent about $100, give or take, with all my family members. That $100 now becomes business income. So I'm going to put $100 under consumer spending, $100 under the business income. Underneath where it says goods offered, that's what Summer Waves sells. So what do they sell? They sell a experience of going to a wave park or a slide park. So I would put in that box a park and foodstuffs. Now, what did I purchase from them? Well, I did purchase tickets to the park as well as food while we were there. So my goods offered are basically my goods purchased, but they don't have to be, but that just ended up being how it is. Now, going down to the factor market, again, firm 2 is where you work. So firm 2, I'm work at Glenn Academy. That's what I would write in there. What do I offer this business? Well, if you flow from the household to the factor market, I am offering labor. And what do I do? What is my input for production? Well, my input for production is I'm a teacher. So I offer labor as a teacher and they pay me. So how much do they pay? Well, for me, that's right around $78,000. And so I'm going to put that in both of the payment boxes as the money flows from Glenn Academy to me, the household. Now, you could put weekly income, hourly, or monthly, however it works for you. But that's how I'm going to fill out my circular flow model as a application of my real world example. Okay, guys, so to finish up today's lesson, what I'd like you to do is I would like you to complete slides 20 through slide 24. And what you're going to do is basically you're going to have a scenario. And in that scenario, you're going to read about 2 sisters, Elisa and Marcella, and you're going to fill out the circular flow model based on these 2 sisters. Okay, so go ahead and take a minute and do that. Then, in the second part of this assignment, from slides 22 to 24, you're going to fill out information related to the circular flow model. So for instance, on slide number 22, you'll have an empty circular flow model only identified by letters. And each of those letters, what you're going to do is you're going to plug in what that letter is. So for instance, letter A would be where the household is spending the money, and that's what you would type in there. From slides 23 to 24, you are going to answer some questions based on what you know about the circular flow model. Okay, so right now what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and pause the video and you're going to fill those things out. So that's your assignment for today to kind of wrap up the day. Okay, so today we looked at the circular flow model, and our learning target was to identify the component parts of the circular flow model. As a success criteria, we tried to apply our real world example by filling out a circular flow model and answering questions related to the circular flow model. So hopefully you guys were able to retain that information and apply it and connect it to the real world. And we'll continue to study the circular flow model as we get closer and closer to our assessment. So I hope you guys had a good day, learned a couple things, and I'll see you tomorrow or at the Google Meet today. Have a good day. It's Mr. Landingwood.